Okay, so before I hand over to our main speakers today, I just wanted to give you a very quick bit of context as to why we're here and the MS Society as a whole. Now, I know that most of you in this room will be MS Society supporters, and some of you will be heavily involved locally in local MS groups, and some not. But I just wanted to give a quick bit of context and a rundown of who the MS Society are, what we do to help people with MS, and where we want to be going as well. So, firstly, who are the MS Society? Well, this is how we articulate it. We're the largest charity for people living with MS in the UK, and we're here for everyone who has multiple sclerosis to provide practical help today and the hope of a cure tomorrow. We play a leading role in research, and we fight for better treatment and care. But what does that mean in practice? Well, we have a strategy. And our strategy gives us clear guidance as to what we do and to focus on what it is we want to achieve. And there are 3 pillars to our strategy, as currently constituted, as you can see here. And I'm just going to go through each of these very briefly so you can see what it is that the MS Society does if you were already unaware. So the first pillar of our strategy is effective treatments and preventing MS. So this covers all of the biomedical research that the MS Society funds, and we separate this into 3 key areas. Firstly, deepening our understanding of progression. So we fund millions of pounds worth of research at universities and research centres throughout the UK, and part of the reason why we're here in Manchester today is that we fund research just down the road at the University of Manchester itself. And it is a priority of ours to fund research with the hope of leading to insights that the progression of MS can be slowed and maybe one day stopped for good. And this also has a global dimension. We're members of the International Progressive MS Alliance, a consortium of international MS charities who are showing our global commitment to ramping up investment into particularly the progressive forms of the condition. Secondly, accelerating clinical trials. So we are aiming to fund, launch and deliver large-scale, efficient clinical trials aimed at slowing, stopping or reversing the accumulation of disability MS. And this is a particularly exciting element of our research programme, and today, particularly during the second talk today, you will hear more about this and what it could mean for future MS treatments. And thirdly, improving our understanding of risk factors. So we want to develop a better understanding of how risk factors can relate to prevention so that one day we can develop prevention strategies, and this means that we are investing heavily into research projects that look at the causes of MS so that hopefully in future fewer people may go on to develop MS. The next pillar of our strategy is people living well with MS. So this covers the work that we do to support anyone living with the condition, as well as families and carers also. And again, this is separated into 3 key areas. The first one is to empower and support anyone living with MS. So this is our work in developing specific services that empower people with MS to understand their rights and to manage their condition. So a key area here is our MS helpline, which some of you may be aware of, some of you may have used. And last year that responded to over 17,000 wide-ranging inquiries and giving people with MS crucial support and information. We also have a huge information service, a free library of publications, information and fact sheets on almost anything to do with MS. So from information for people who are newly diagnosed to information on individual symptoms with MS, and also information on things like adapting your home to suit your condition. Secondly, ensuring that everyone can access responsive treatment, care and support. So we seek to improve access to MS treatment, care and support across the UK, and also ensure that policy, government policy and medical practice within the NHS reflect the reality of living with the condition. And thanks in part to our Treat Me Right campaign, which some of you may be aware of, we know that more people than ever are now using a disease-modifying treatment, or DMT, for their relapsing MS. But we want that figure to be even higher, and we will continue to fight that for everyone with MS to have access to the right treatment at the right time. And finally, as I mentioned, supporting carers, families and friends. So we support carers, families and friends affected by MS to both understand the condition and to maintain their own health and well-being. And our grants are key to this. We award grants this year totalling just under £1 million, to, both nationally and locally through our MS groups to help people access equipment, adaptations they may need, and also crucially this includes support for carers and families. And finally, connected communities, powerful voices. So we want to connect the MS communities to support people affected by MS to connect with one another, enabling you to foster friendships, to share experiences and to tackle common issues together, and to build confidence and reduce isolation that we know the condition can cause. Our local MS groups, which some of you or many of you in this room may be members, are very, very key to this. Also, people affected by MS leading change. So we want to collaborate with and support you, the MS community, in campaigning for change on major issues that we know affect your lives profoundly. So we nurture campaigning. We have a campaigns network, and this supports any people to develop the skills and confidence to speak up to local and national government on the issues that we know affect you. And one area that we are particularly focused on at the moment is campaigning for the government to scrap the personal independence payments 20-metre rule. We know that this significantly and disproportionately affects people affected by MS and prevents you from accessing the benefits that you so sorely need. And finally, improving society's understanding of MS. So we work to raise awareness of MS more widely in the media and to increase both public and political understanding of the realities of living with the condition. And it's been a big year for us. You may have seen in the news, in the media recently, that we launched the public phase of our Stop MS appeal. And this has generated a huge amount of media coverage, and this genuinely does help to increase the public's understanding of awareness of MS and its effects. So the MS Society does a lot of things, and as I've mentioned, some of you in this room, many of you in this room will be supporters, members of the Society. So straight off, I just wanted to say a big thank you. Without your support, we wouldn't be able to do any of it. So thank you very much indeed. But what we are here specifically to talk about today is research and the research programs that we fund, and to give you information on how much we know about MS now, but also to tell you about what research is happening right now as well, and what that might mean for treatments in the future. So I'm going to hand over to our speakers now. Today we have with us Ben Atkinson and Caitlin Astbury, who are both from the MS Society. So both Ben and Caitlin will speak for about 30 to 40 minutes about their talks, and there'll also be plenty of time for questions at the end, probably about 10 minutes at the end of their presentations for questions. So please do take the opportunity to ask any questions that you do have. We'll also have a bit of a joint Q&A at the end of the second presentation as well, but if you don't want to ask a question in front of many people, don't worry. We're all going to be here at lunch and during a break as well. There's going to be a break, 20-minute break after Ben's presentation. We're going to be around in both that break and the lunch break, so feel free to ask us any questions you have then as well. Right, so I'm done. So I'm now going to hand over to Ben, who's going to start talking about the history of MS research and what we have achieved to date. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you. So hello everyone, can you hear me at the back? Just about? Okay, please let me know if you can't. So hello, my name is Ben Atkinson. As Adam said, I work in the research communications team at the MS Society. Today I'm going to talk to you about the progress that we've made to date. I'm going to start off talking to you about the incidence and prevalence of MS. I'm going to explain to you the causes or the potential causes of MS. And then I'm going to talk to you about the basic biology of MS. What's actually going on in the human body which causes the array of symptoms that we all experience. And then I'm going to touch upon our strategy, what we are fundraising for to help eventually stop MS, or what we believe will eventually stop MS. And then later on, my esteemed colleague and good friend Caitlin is going to talk to you through what's on the horizon, what are the latest developments in research, and what have we got to look forward to. I know many of you might be already read up on the condition, and many of you might know some of the basic principles there are to do with MS. But I urge you all to please come on this journey with me, and hopefully by the end of this presentation, we'll all end up in the same place. So first of all, a quick disclaimer. The research team are not medical professionals. We're not medical doctors. We are researchers. And therefore, we cannot give you specific advice on treatments or individual treatments based on your particular circumstance. But what we can do is translate the evidence for you. We can explain what the research says and hopefully answer any burning questions that you have. Certainly we'll try to. So first, I'm going to start off with a quick overview. So MS is a uniquely human condition, and MS is actually an autoimmune condition. Now what that means is the body's immune system is targeting its own cells as if it were an infection. You see, when our body comes into contact with a bacteria or a virus, our body generates an immune response to protect us. But in MS, the body generates an immune response inappropriately to the nerves, to the protective coating around our nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord. And because these nerves govern everything that we do, it can cause a range of symptoms, and some of them that I've listed here on the right-hand side. And they range from fatigue, weakness, bladder problems, spasticity, and even depression. It affects around 2.3 million people around the world, and we've actually had recent figures from Public Health England suggesting it affects around 120,000 people in the UK, so this figure is slightly out of date. Now, symptoms usually start in MS in the 20s and 30s, and it normally affects, well, it does affect 3 times more women than it does men. Now, we're not really exactly sure why, but what we think it has something to do is with the hormones, the hormonal fluctuations women have throughout their monthly cycle, but also throughout their lifespan. That's pre and peri and post-menopause. And we're currently looking into this now. So I've talked to you a little bit about symptoms of MS, and this data was actually gathered from one of our data banks called the MS Register. And what it is it's an institution that we fund, and it's a huge data bank where we can collect, where anyone with MS can sign up. They can fill out patient surveys. We can also collate clinical data from neurologists and NHS data, and really get a bigger picture of what it's like to live with MS. And from this, we can understand what are the major symptoms of MS, and then hopefully help to develop treatments for them. And one thing which is something which I wasn't aware of, that 88% of people in this survey experience tiredness and fatigue. And from this, which I'll touch upon a bit later, developing treatments for tiredness and fatigue is one of our top 10 research priorities. So the causes of MS. Now this is something which people are very interested in, but unfortunately we don't know a definitive cause. What we do know is some certain things that can increase your risk of developing MS. There's infections that may act as a trigger of MS, but not necessarily a cause, and I'll touch upon that a little bit later. And we also know that vitamin D is hugely important, and quite a lot of neurologists now will prescribe vitamin D supplements for people with MS. But I'll explain that a little bit more. I know some of you will have questions on it. We know that smoking increases progression. So if you have MS and you smoke, you may increase your rate of progression than if you have MS and you don't smoke. And we also know that obesity increases the risk, or is correlated with the risk of MS. And we're not really sure why, but we know that obesity, when you're obese, you have an increased inflammation in the body. And in MS, you have inflammation in the body as well. And there's a potential link here, but research is still ongoing to understand the potential link. We also talk about genes. Now I certainly thought years ago that MS was an inherited condition. I thought if my mum or my father had MS, then maybe I would be at a greater risk of developing it, or I would surely develop it. But that's not necessarily the case. So if you live in the UK, your chances of getting MS are 1 in 330. And if you have a mother or father with MS, your chances of getting it are 1 in 76. A brother and sister is 1 in 37. But even if you have an identical twin, that means that their DNA is exactly the same as yours and they have MS. You're 4 times likely not to get MS than you are to get it. So that shows you that there's a huge interplay with your environment and what you're exposed to during your lifetime. And we're just trying to understand this now. So I mentioned vitamin D before, also known as the sunshine vitamin. So vitamin D is made in your body when your skin is exposed to sunlight. And what we know is that MS is more common the further you live away from the equator. You see, the closer you are to the equator, the more sunlight you are exposed to. It's more intense, and there's certainly a larger proportion of the day where you'll be exposed to sun. And what we found is that vitamin D deficiency affects the risk of developing MS. We found that people who live further away from the equator have a greater risk of developing the condition, which is extremely interesting. But what we don't know is if vitamin D will help to prevent MS. We don't know if everyone took a vitamin D supplement and raised their vitamin D levels, would it reduce your risk of developing it? That is something that we don't know. We also don't know if vitamin D can be used to treat MS. So quite often people, when they're diagnosed with MS, will be on a disease-modifying therapy. I'll explain what they are a little bit later. That helps to control the condition or certainly manage it and try to slow progression. And we don't know if vitamin D can do something similar. We also don't know what dosage is needed because vitamin D accumulates in the body and everyone can take the same dose and it'll have a different effect on your blood levels due to genetic factors, but also due to weight, size, etc. And we don't know what dose is safe, and if supplements work. We don't know if supplements have the same benefit as if you were exposed to sunlight, for example. So a lot of this is still, we're still researching it, and we hope to find answers very soon. But please, if you're worried about your vitamin D levels, please check with your neurologists. Mainly because vitamin D can accumulate in the body, and just because it's natural, just because it's found in nature, doesn't mean it can't cause harm. We know that it can accumulate, and too much can cause toxic levels. So please check with your neurologist if you are taking supplements, or if you would like to. So are people with, so this is some research which we're funding by Professor Ruth Dobson in Queen's Mary University, London, and what she's looking at to see if people with MS in the UK, if they are vitamin D deficient. And she's also looking at the symptoms of people with MS if they're taking supplements. And this research is still ongoing now. It only started this year, but we're looking forward to see what she finds. Now, I spoke about or touched upon infections before. Now, some of you might be familiar with glandular fever, right? Also known as the kissing disease. And it seems to be caused by Epstein-Barr virus. Now, this virus is common in childhood, and it's linked to, well, I'll put it this way. A lot of people are exposed to it, most people are, but what we know is that most people with MS have been exposed to this virus in the past. Now, it's not to say it's a potential cause, but because it may have triggered MS. And we're trying to figure out exactly why that could be the case. And we're currently funding research now to see if infections, the amount of infections that people can accumulate throughout the year with MS, whether that increases the progression to disability. So we're trying to understand exactly what happens to people with MS when they are infected and what goes on in the human body. Now, a quick word on nutrition. Now, I get very excited about this topic because my background's in nutritional biochemistry. So if I go off on a tangent, I'm very sorry. I'll try and reel it back in, okay? So there's a couple of books here which some of you may be familiar with. We've got the Overcoming MS protocol, which is by Professor George Jelinek over in Australia. We've got Dr. Terry Walls, who's a medical doctor in the US. And these are all diets, and what they say is that if you eat this way, you might lessen your symptoms, you might feel better, and you may be able to come off drugs entirely. Now, I'm not saying if you are on one of these diets and you feel good, that you should stop. But what I think it's important to note is just because a diet like this can make someone feel good, we're all individuals, we all have bio-individuality, we're all genetically different. And therefore, one diet that may work for someone may not work for someone else. And saying that these diets will help you reduce symptoms is not necessarily true at all, because there's no robust scientific evidence to support this statement. And I believe if there was, the MS Society would be the first people, or I'd like to think we would be one of the first people to support one of these dietary protocols. What's even more confusing is that some of them range massively in what they suggest you should be eating. So some of them say, like the Ornish Protocol or John McDougall, who's another doctor in the US, say that you should get 80% of your calories from carbohydrates, right? And then a ketogenic style diet is saying that you should get 80% of your calories from fat. And they're saying this will help your condition, etc. Now that's confusing in and of itself, and I'm trained in it. So never mind people who are just trying to find out what they should eat for a healthier lifestyle. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are some things which you can do which help to benefit everyone. And one of the things is ensure that you're eating, or make sure that you've got adequate nutrition. And what I mean by this is intaking the right amount of vitamins and minerals within your diet for optimal function, so you can function well. And the way that you do that is eat a range of whole foods. And also what I would suggest is that you eat in a way which is sustainable for you. Now what I mean by this is a lot of people go on a diet, they eat a certain way, and they restrict what they were eating before. But the problem with that is that you restrict everything, and then you eat a certain way, and by the very definition of diet, is for a temporary time. You will go back to eating the way you were before, and you haven't really learned anything. You haven't learned any new habits to help sustain that in the long term. So having incremental changes over time seems to be better. Now what I mean by that, and this is just an example, if you ate 6 biscuits a day after dinner, now this is generalizing, I'm not saying all of you eat 6 biscuits a day after dinner, I hope not, but if you do, then you can reduce that to maybe 5 biscuits a day for 1 week. And then the next week you change something else. Let's say you eat pizza every day for dinner. And then you're like, well, one day of that week, I'm going to have half a pizza and some salad. And that's the second week. And then you can see you make a little change every single week. And after 52 weeks, after 1 year, I guarantee you've made a dramatic change to your life for the better, just by having a little change over time. And you probably wouldn't even notice it that much, unlike being very restrictive all at once. Does that make sense? Okay. And thirdly, I want to make sure that you eat in a way that makes you feel good. Now, what I mean by this is avoid foods which potentially make you feel bad. Such if you eat a certain food, it could be an egg, it could be anything, and you feel bloated, you feel lethargic, you have brain fog, maybe that food, even though it's considered healthy, may not be serving you. And that's something to be aware of. Okay? Now, when I said this to my friend, Emily, she said, but Ben, I feel fantastic when I eat a whole cheesecake. And I said, Emily, you've completely missed the point of this talk. So I'm not suggesting you eat a cheesecake, but what I'm suggesting is it doesn't have to be, you need to eat in a way which makes you feel good about yourself. And last but not least is eat in a healthy way. And what I mean by this is an emphasis of whole and processed foods, and that is the periphery of the supermarket, things that you'd find in nature. There's a nice little picture here, and the reason why I say this is I also eat a variety of colours. So that's because you've got lycopene in tomatoes, which are wonderful for your health. You've got allicin in garlic, sulforaphane in green vegetables. You've got fluoridin in the skin of apples. And all these chemicals have unique health benefits. And what's even more interesting to me, and I am going on, I will move on in a second, is that the synergy of these compounds have a greater health benefit than the sum of their parts. And that means that if you eat them together, they can lead to a greater health outcome than when you eat them separately. But when I say eat a variety of colours, Starburst, Smarties, M&Ms, angel cake, that's not what I mean, okay? I know what you're like. It's not that. So this is the biology of MS, and this is what I'm going to talk about now. So I'm going to give you a brief overview. I've talked about the incidence and prevalence of MS. I've talked to you about the potential causes. And I've talked to you about a word on nutrition. And now I'm going to talk to you about the science of MS. What's actually going on in the human body, in the brain and spinal cord, which causes the array of symptoms that we experience. So your central nervous system is made of your brain and spinal cord, and in there you've got these nerves, and these are also known as neurons. Now what you see is this is the nerve cell body, the blue part, and you can also see it on here. And around here you've got this kind of coating. It's a fatty substance known as myelin. And myelin is extremely important for nerve cell health. These nerve cells communicate electronically, so electrical impulses move through the nerve cell body. And myelin helps to protect the nerve cell, but also allow these communications to pass from one nerve cell to the other. It allows the efficient movement of the electricity from one nerve cell to the other. So when it functions well and healthily, it works like this. And as you can see, this is a cross-section of myelin. This is under a microscope. And as I said before, myelin electrically insulates the nerve cell, helps the transmission of these electrical impulses, and also protects the nerve cell from damage. Now, you might think this is a sciencey photo. This is actually a Swiss roll. Just tried to throw it in there. So what happens in MS? Well, I told you before that MS is an autoimmune condition, and this is when the immune system goes awry. So the immune cells start inappropriately attacking this protective coating called myelin that I just told you about. So they travel across the blood-brain barrier and start attacking the nerve cell. And as the nerve cell becomes damaged, those electrical impulses, which are so important for our body's function, become disrupted. Okay, so that could be the difference between me being able to move my finger well and then really struggling to move it. Does that make sense? And as the condition progresses, as myelin gets damaged, you can actually damage the nerve cell body itself. And if the nerve cell body gets deteriorated enough, these messages can no longer be sent. And that can be the difference between limited function of a certain part of the body and then no function at all. So how do we believe that we can stop MS? What is the MS Society doing where we can hopefully stop the condition? And we actually have a three-pronged approach. One is immunomodulation. So what is immunomodulation? Well, immunomodulation means that you help to control the immune attacks in the body. And we do this by either trapping the immune cells in certain areas of the body through medication, or we remove them from the circulatory system. So we can reduce the damage done by the immune system in MS. And that's the way a lot of these disease-modifying therapies, which many of you will be familiar of, work. That's how they work. The second thing is myelin repair. So we've prevented the immune attacks, or certainly slowed them down. We then want to repair some of that function, some of that myelin that may have been damaged. Now remember when I said before, when the myelin's damaged, those signals might get disrupted. We believe that if we can repair this damage quick enough, we may be able to regain some function in certain people. And the last thing is neuroprotection. So we've reduced the amount of immune attacks, we've repaired some of that nerve cell damage. We now want to keep those nerve cells healthy and free from further damage. And the way we do that is through neuroprotective treatments. And although we have many treatments for controlling the immune system, we are currently researching treatments for myelin repair and neuroprotection. And my colleague Caitlin will be covering that later on. So how far have we come? Well, 25 years ago, we had no disease-modifying therapies whatsoever. There was only one gene linked to MS, and we had little understanding of environmental factors. That was obesity, smoking, sunlight, etc. And we also had limited symptom relief. And I actually think this is really important and quite under-acknowledged, is that symptom relief, physiotherapy, pain management, things like that, vastly improve quality of life. And I know we're always talking about treatment, but I think these are equally as important. So I'm glad to say today it's a very different story. So today we have over a dozen licensed DMTs for relapsing remitting MS. There's a positive phase 3 trial for secondary progressive MS, and we've actually had one licensed treatment in the US, and it's called siponimod, which Caitlin's going to cover later. And there's one DMT license for primary progressive MS. Many of you would have heard of Ocrevus, and that was licensed for, or is licensed for relapsing remitting MS, and it was funded by NICE. And just recently, earlier this year, We campaigned, very many of our colleagues and other charities campaigned for it to be funded by NICE or the NHS for primary progressive MS. And I'm really glad to say that that campaign was successful. And we also know that 200 genes are linked to MS because we only thought that one gene was linked before. We have a better understanding of risk factors, that's the vitamin D, smoking, obesity that I touched upon before. And we also have new symptom management treatments, which I'll touch upon a bit later. So our current investment in research. So Adam talked about this a little bit earlier, but we're one of the largest UK charitable funders of MS research. We funded around 222 million, this is slightly out of date, since 1956, and that is in today's money, into research development. And we're also currently supporting, again, this is slightly out of date, 70 projects, just over 70 projects, totaling over £22 million in the projects that we're funding now. And we're now a founding and managing member of the International Progressive MS Alliance. A lot of people think that we only work in the UK, but what we try and do now is collaborate with our colleagues abroad in institutions across the world and Europe in order to find, hopefully, a way to stop MS for good. So how do we know what to fund? Well, our MS Society research program has our overriding values. So we want to find treatments which are relevant for people with MS. And we have two distinct areas of research and 4 different types. So first is biomedical research, and this is where we understand the causes of MS, or we try to understand the causes of MS, and we also develop new treatments. And second is care and services. Now this is symptom relief, understanding things like physiotherapy, things to help improve mobility, manage pain, and also care and services. These are things like making sure you get the access to an MS nurse or the right treatment for you. But how do we know what to fund? Now, we know we use our top 10 JLA priorities. And what this is a list of top 10 research priorities developed by neurologists, but also by people with MS. So what we wanted to do was listen to what people with MS wanted, what was important to them, and also discuss with the leading scientists to understand what was feasible. And we came across this list. So probably unsurprisingly to most of you, our top priority is to slow, stop, or reverse the accumulation of disability. And then the second is prevent MS completely. And the third, if you remember my second slide when I said 88% of that cohort that we surveyed experienced tiredness and fatigue, well, one of our third top 10 priorities, is to develop fatigue treatments. So moving on to our centres of excellence. So these are centres that we fund at the MS Society and where a lot of our research takes place. We've got the UK MS Register, which I spoke to you about before, and the MS Society Tissue Bank, which I've got a video which I'll show you just after this slide. And the MS Society Edinburgh Centre for MS Research and the MS Society Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair. That's probably one of the first times I've not stumbled over saying that. So these two centres do a lot of research in understanding the causes of MS and also developing treatments on a cellular level. So we know that cells, the nerve cells, make up our brain and spinal cord, and what they try and do is indicate whether certain treatments will work on those cells. And if we think these treatments will work in the lab, then we can hopefully move the development of these treatments on and test them in people. These are hugely important. But I'm going to touch upon the MS Society Tissue Bank a little bit more later. Some of the treatments that we've made to date, or some of the advances that we've made to date, I'm going to touch upon now. So the first is the McDonald Diagnostic Criteria. So this is a criteria made so we can help to diagnose MS much quicker and more efficiently. And what we funded was the first MRI scanner dedicated to MS research. And before this was done, it was very hard to do research into MS without actually looking what was going on in the brain. So we're very excited that we were able to do this. The next is something which we funded into fatigue management. And what this is it's called the Facets program. and it's a group-based fatigue management group where you have cognitive behavioral therapy and energy effectiveness techniques. So it doesn't sound particularly exciting, but that's basically understanding what techniques or what activities that you're doing aren't serving you and may not be necessary. So you can put the energy into things which you enjoy effectively. And it leads to reduced fatigue levels. And something that we funded, this is a very small study, but it got some media coverage, was funding into hot chocolate. So we had a small group of people drinking a certain amount of hot chocolate, and it was only a very small pilot study. And what was found in the flavonoids, it was believed that the flavonoids within this hot chocolate, with these plant chemicals, could help improve fatigue. Now, even though it's a very small study, I think it's quite exciting because possibly gives you a little bit of excuse to have that square of dark chocolate. It is dark, but hey, who doesn't love a bit of chocolate? The next thing which I talked to you about, or touched upon a little bit later, was symptom management. Something which isn't really talked about very often, but one thing that we funded was the earlier trials into Botox treatment for bladder dysfunction. And we know this something can be quite debilitating and embarrassing, but what we found is Botox injections can be a safe and effective treatment for an overactive bladder. People can control their condition. And we also funded trials to make sure that if you are using a catheter or something like that, that you can reduce the risk of urinary tract infections, which I think is extremely important as well in terms of quality of life. Now on to the MS Society Tissue Bank. Now this is a really exciting centre. What it is one of the leading MS tissue repositories in the world. It supported over 400 research projects, sent out 10,000 tissue samples worldwide in over 14 different countries. Now, the way the tissue bank works is people with MS and people without MS who want to contribute to research donate their brain and spinal cord to the tissue bank when they pass away, similar to a donor card, if you imagine like that. But this is specific for MS research. And what they do here is to really understand the causes of MS and also develop new treatments to help the condition. And I've got a video on the next slide with the professor which leads that particular institution, which I'll play for you now.
MS is a condition that only affects the human brain, and therefore it's important, if we need to understand how the human brain is affected by MS, that we study the actual tissue that is damaged by the MS process. We first set the MS Tissue Bank up in 1998, so it provides the vital tissue that people need to be able to study what is actually causing the damage in MS. Without that tissue, a lot of research simply cannot be done. People agree to donate their brain and spinal cord to the tissue bank while they're still alive.
Well, Tissue Bank is organized as a transplant unit in a way. So whenever one of our donors passes away, we are there to organize the tissue retrieval. We will collect the tissue, bring it back, apply a variety of preservation techniques. Freezing is the preferred method of tissue preservation because frozen samples are most suitable. Another choice is formalin. Well, once we fix tissue in formalin, we need to put it in a suitable medium so we can cut very thin sections. Paraffin wax is the best choice because it doesn't interact with the tissue. The tissue can be easily molded and cut into very thin sections. They're mounted on a glass slide, and then we apply a variety of dyes or antibodies or proteins, and we use different detection techniques to highlight different parts of this section of tissue, and then we visualize it under the microscope.
So then researchers around the world contact us and say they need some MS tissue for their research, and then we prepare the material for them, and then it's sent out by courier to their particular lab. The MS tissue can be used for just about any area of MS research. So if we want to understand the genetics behind MS that might make people more susceptible, we can study that in the tissue. We can help develop better diagnostic tests for MS by brain scanning as you would a patient, identify molecules that may be damaging the neurons.
We have to engage with our audience, so we go around conferences and exhibitions to meet people with MS or without MS as well, because they can also donate. We hope the people they discuss donating brains with the family before they sign up, so everybody's aware of their last wish. We also hope that they sign up while they're still fit and well, so we can get more information of their health. Visit our website, there's information sheets that you can download and also a set of forms you can fill in and then send back to us. Or you can call us to request information back, and we put that in the post.
We're very reliant on people who want to be involved in research. We have 4,500 people signed up to donate their brain and spinal cord when they die. But we still always need more people to sign up, as the tissue is being used all the time by research.
Okay, I hope that was very interesting for you. This is the end of my presentation now. I hope you've all enjoyed it and hopefully learnt something. I'll now open the floor up to any questions you may have. I'd be happy to answer them.
Right, I'm just going to go round with this microphone. Got two people here, and then I'll go round the side. But please do wait for the microphone so that everyone can hear. Okay, shoot.
To what extent are other countries involved in exchanging their research with each other?
Excellent question. So, did everyone hear that? Yeah, fantastic. So, in terms of to what extent, there's a lot of collaborations happening. We're actually funding a trial this year. It started earlier last year. It was called MS-STAT2, which my colleague Caitlin is going to talk about, and we're actually part funding that with the MS National Centre, which is MS National Trust, I think, was the US MS Society, basically. And so we try and collaborate as much as we can, share research, because that's the only way we can grow. We actually run a conference called MS Frontiers, where researchers in MS across the world come together and present their work. So we try and do that as much as humanly possible. And that's to basically make sure that we're not working in silos and we can work collaboratively. Does that answer your question?
Good morning. You mentioned a lot of MS triggers.
Yes.
Triggers for MS.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't, probably quite deliberately, didn't mention any causes of MS,
Yeah.
which is subtly different. Is any progress happening in that sort of area of research at all?
So the causes, yeah, well, yes, there is progress being made, but in terms of a definitive cause, we don't know of one. So then we know that things that can predispose you to the risk of developing MS, genes is specifically one of them. But also, as I said before, that infections, and we're really understanding why these infections may act as a trigger or make people more susceptible to developing MS. So that's where the research is currently going. I don't know if Caitlin knows of anything else. She's also in the room.
Wait for the mic, Caitlin.
I think ultimately the thing with MS is because it's kind of so diverse and there are so many different factors that influence someone's risk of developing MS, we don't think there is kind of a single cause which we can definitively say will make someone develop MS. I think the research so far has shown that it's kind of like a kind of series of triggers, that if you get those series of triggers in a certain kind of combination, that will cause MS, whereas one single thing on its own won't lead to MS. So I guess the research that we're doing is not to find one single cause, but to understand more about those different triggers as well, if that answers your question.
Just to add to that, I think it's likely, just echoing what Caitlin said, it's multifactorial. It won't be one particular cause.
Question at the back here.
Hi. You said that glandular fever was one of the causes. So if somebody gets glandular fever, do the doctors know that they're more susceptible to MS, and is there anything that can be done about that? I think my husband had glandular fever and got MS later on in life. Mm-hmm. So can you start the course before it develops to MS or not? Because, as you said, that's one of the main things is glandular fever, that when you look back at it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So what we know is that people with MS are more likely to have or have been exposed to that virus, the Epstein-Barr virus, which causes glandular fever. But it's not to say that if you've had glandular fever in the past, you will develop MS. And this makes the association quite difficult. Because if you had glandular fever in the past and you're thinking, well, maybe you're going to develop MS, we don't have a predictive indicator of whether that will be the case.
No, yeah, but do the doctors, are doctors aware that that could predispose, that you could get MS, and is there anything they can do if you know, with that? Because you've got this information, the doctors apparently don't know anything about MS, that kind of, you know, not much of a specialist.
Mm-hmm.
So to make them aware that this is, you know, this is a chance that could happen, they've got probably more chance of getting MS than people that haven't had glandular fever. So what can you do about that?
Glandular fever is something which can develop when you're exposed to the Epstein-Barr virus, but you can actually be exposed to the virus and not develop glandular fever. And there's actually quite a significant amount of the population which have been exposed to the virus don't develop glandular fever and don't develop MS. So there'll be more people which are exposed to the virus and don't develop MS than develop it. So it's very hard to track and very hard to test, and probably extremely expensive to test everyone if they've had glandular fever to see if they will develop MS in the future. I don't know of anything which is going on right now, but if we do, I imagine we'll post about it online.
Got a question here, and then I'm going to go over to that gentleman over there.
Thank you. Is there still a connection, they thought, with the measles virus at one time? Was there? I think.
I'm unfamiliar with that one,
Right,
if I'm
okay.
entirely honest with you.
Right.
I know there's certain connections that people are trying to make with certain viral, because a lot of people will say if they are exposed to a virus or they develop a cold or something, that triggered their MS. But what one neurologist I was speaking to told me was that it's very hard to figure out which one came first. Was the MS always there, and then the cold just exacerbated the symptoms more, so it became more prevalent and then you realized it? Or was there a trigger where a certain virus caused you to develop the condition? And we're still not sure about that. And I'm not sure in particular about the measles virus. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you.
Okay, question from this gentleman here.
Hello. Primary question is, I don't know the exact terminology, but there's something called GC-MAF, part of which is a macrophage activating factor, which has been shown to cure up to 70-80% of cancers. Because this is an autoimmune disease, and the whole purpose of taking GC-MAF is to increase your immune system, which has been depleted. Is there any research going on into that? And the second question, it's recently been shown that if you have measles, your immediate immune system is automatically depleted so that you become more vulnerable to other diseases. It wipes out part of your defense system. So that's basically two questions.
What was the second question exactly?
Has there been any relation shown between particular diseases and MS? Because at first you said there was one gene that was shown to start an MS, and then the list came up saying there's 200.
Okay, yeah. So I'll just clarify that last point for a second. So we believe there was one gene which was linked to MS. Now research developed and we now know that there are over 200 genes which are potentially linked to developing MS. Your first question was about GC-MAF. Now you're going to have to, I'm not familiar with that term, but is it a type of immunotherapy? It is. Okay. So immunotherapy works, for people that don't know, by, I suppose, stimulating your immune system to target a particular part of the body, in this case, some types of cancer. I don't know any research which has gone into that in MS. But what I would say, if you're trying to, with immunotherapy, you're trying to target a certain area of the body, MS is already targeting, or the immune system is already targeting the myelin. So I wouldn't be sure what the benefit could be there, but I'm not an expert in immunotherapy, so I wouldn't be able to tell you that. And your second question was whether measles predisposes you to developing other conditions. Is that correct? In terms of it predisposing you to develop other conditions, I'm not sure. I'm not a measles expert, unfortunately, but I imagine if...
It's just recently been announced.
Okay.
Only very recent.
Right. I'm not familiar with that research, so I cannot answer your question. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, we'll take our break there. We're going to just break for 20 minutes. So you can all just relax for a little bit. And just want to say thank you to Ben for a great talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
See you in 20 minutes. Right, just a couple of things before we reconvene with the second talk. First of all, can we please make sure that our mobiles are turned off or switched or switched on to silent as a minimum, please, just to avoid distractions. And second of all, I'm aware that a number of people have asked if if copies of the slides can be made available. They can. There's feedback forms on the table, which I'll tell you about later. But if you leave your email address or something on those forms, and we can certainly send maybe not the exact version that we're using, but certainly a version that gives you the gist out to you in a couple of weeks' time or something like that. Okie doke. Well, without further ado, we'll move on to the second part of our talks today, and it's from Caitlin Astbury, who's going to talk about MS research at the moment and what breakthroughs we think may be on the horizon. So, welcome, Caitlin.
Hi everyone. Just wanted to say firstly, thank you very much for coming today. I hope you enjoyed Ben's talk. I think it was really interesting, and hopefully we're kind of all on the same page now about kind of what MS is and some of the possible risk factors and also the biology of it. So I'm here today to talk a bit more about the kind of future breakthroughs on the horizon, so the things that we're really excited about at the MS Society at the moment. So I do have a slight cold, so if I do cough at all during it, I do apologise. I've got some water, so hopefully we should be fine. So I work in the research communications team at the MS Society, so I'm Ben's colleague. So the first thing, and I think one of the things that we get asked questions about probably the most, is what new treatments are on the horizon, what's happening in terms of developing treatments. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the process of developing new treatments and also kind of treatments in trials at the moment and what we hope to see in the next few years. So first of all, I just wanted to talk through the process of developing an effective treatment. So this isn't kind of specific to MS, this is across a range of conditions. This is how treatments are made. So first of all, we have the kind of lab work. So this kind of starts off with an idea in the lab that researchers will have. It may be a hypothesis that a certain cell is involved in the condition or a certain receptor. So they'll go away and kind of apply for funding to find out more about this idea. So they'll then take this back into the lab and do a whole range of research, including kind of cell cultures, animal models, and kind of computational modelling as well, to help us understand a bit more about what that is and hopefully kind of see whether their hypothesis is right. So this process kind of is quite an iterative cycle, so it'll repeat itself quite a lot, and researchers will kind of have an idea, find out a bit more about it, and then go back into the lab to refine that idea. So this process can take between 6 and 9 years. So this process in the lab can be quite a long process. So once a researcher has kind of had an idea, done some research using kind of animal models and cell cultures, and found a potential treatment, what we need to do then is see whether this works in people. So the first cycle of clinical trials is phase 1 trials. So phase 1 trials, really the aim of these is to determine whether a treatment is safe in people. So we want to know about the side effects, we want to know kind of whether people can tolerate taking this treatment, whether the method of taking the treatment, whether it's by infusion or a pill, is kind of suitable. So this kind of first phase of clinical trials tends to take around a year and will involve kind of a small number of people, so between 15 and 30 people. And often these are people who don't have a condition, because what we want to know is really how this treatment works at a very basic level in healthy people. So if a treatment is shown to be safe and tolerable and doesn't have any serious side effects, it will then go into a phase 2 trial. So a phase 2 trial is really testing then what the potential for that drug is for people with a condition, so for people with MS. So in these phase 2 trials, we tend to include a lot more people. These will be people both with the condition and without the condition. And again, this process can take around a year, and up to 300 people tend to be involved in these phase 2 clinical trials. So often what researchers are looking at in these phase 2 trials is, again, the safety and tolerability of this treatment, but also if it shows a potential effect for people with MS. So if a treatment kind of goes through these 2 phases of clinical trials and still looks like a promising treatment for a condition, it will go into a phase 3 trial. So phase 3 trials are kind of the largest stage of trials, and the aim of a phase 3 trial is really to kind of nail down whether this treatment is effective for a condition, so for MS. So these are much larger trials, so they'll have kind of between 500 and 2,000 people, and they can take much longer, so they can take 1 to 3 years on average. So if a treatment has made it all the way through those 3 phases of clinical trials and the evidence shows that it's an effective treatment, it then needs to be kind of licensed. So this means that the European Medicines Agency decides whether to make this treatment available for people. So this process, again, can take around 2 years for a treatment to go from a phase 3 trial to approved by the EMA. But unfortunately, that's not the end of the story there. So once a treatment is licensed, it's able to be prescribed privately, but it's not yet available on the NHS. So there's a final step before this treatment's made available on the NHS, and this is kind of approval by NICE. So they decide whether a treatment is cost effective, and if it does appear to be cost effective, the treatment then can be made available on the NHS. So as you can see, that process from kind of an idea in the lab to a treatment that's actually available on the NHS can take around 15 years on average. And of course, not all treatments that kind of look promising in the lab will make it all the way through these stages. So I just wanted to highlight kind of treatments in clinical trials for MS at the moment. So you can see here that we already have over a dozen treatments that are licensed for relapsing MS. So these are treatments that have been through all of those phases of clinical trials and are available for people living with MS. We also have several treatments in phase 2 and phase 3 trials at the moment. So some examples of those include ponesimod, bexarotene, and several more as well. So there are more treatments kind of coming through that clinical trials pipeline. For progressive MS, it's until recently been kind of a less understood side of the condition. So it's been much harder to find treatments that are effective for progression. However, it is looking a lot more promising at the moment. So in May this year, the treatment Ocrevus was made available on the NHS for people with early active primary progressive MS. So this is the first treatment that's available for primary progressive MS, which is hugely exciting. But obviously, we need treatments for everyone living with MS. So there are many treatments going through trials at the moment for progressive MS. But at the MS Society, what we want to see is the treatments moving through this pipeline much more quickly and really being available for people with progressive MS. So I just thought I'd bring us quickly back to this diagram that you saw in Ben's presentation earlier. So at the MS Society, we believe that we have 3 ways that combined we can use to stop MS. So these are immunomodulation, so stopping those rogue immune cells from attacking the nerves and the myelin in the first place. And if we're able to stop those immune attacks from happening or lessen the effects of those immune attacks, that means that people will experience less damage to their myelin and slower progression. So as Ben said, we've been kind of hugely successful in this area so far. So of the over a dozen treatments that are available, they all act in some way on the immune system. But obviously we can't completely control how the immune system works. So we need to find other ways of kind of combining immune system and other aspects to be able to stop MS. So the second one, as Ben mentioned, is myelin repair. So being able to put myelin back onto the nerves that have already been damaged by those immune cells. So this is a hugely exciting area at the moment, and we think that this will be something that we see a lot more of in the coming years. And of course, the final one is protecting the nerve cell from damage. So making an environment where the nerve cells are able to function effectively. So I've just got a small graphic here just kind of really describing how we think stopping the immune cells will help us to stop MS. So there are several different ways that we can go about controlling the immune system. So one is killing those rogue immune cells. We can also prevent them from entering the brain in the first place, so they aren't able to attack that myelin. And we're also able to trap them in certain parts of the body, like the lymph nodes, so they're not kind of wandering around the body and having an effect. So we're funding a lot of research looking at how we can prevent these immune cells from damaging the nerves in MS. So this is, as I said, something we've had huge successes with over the last 20 years. So we still need to develop treatments to kind of stop the immune cells, even though we already have effective treatments, because they're not 100% effective. They won't alone completely stop MS. And also what we want to know is whether treatment with an aggressive DMT from the start, from diagnosis, is more effective than a kind of escalation approach where you start with a less effective treatment and build up to those aggressive treatments. So that's an area of immunomodulation that we're currently funding some research into. So I mentioned ocrelizumab, or Ocrevus, is one treatment that affects the immune system. So it has been licensed for all forms of relapsing MS and people with early active primary progressive MS. So people who have inflammation on an MRI scan, have been diagnosed within the last decade and can still walk. So ocrelizumab is able to kill a subset of immune cells called B cells, and the research has shown that it can reduce the relapse rate for people with relapsing MS and slow the rate of progression. And for primary progressive MS, it was able to slow disability progression from 36% to 30% compared to a placebo. We also have had recently a successful phase 3 trial of a drug called siponimod. So this, again, targets the immune system and has been shown to reduce the risk of disability progression by 21%. It was also able to reduce relapse rates and reduce brain atrophy. So brain atrophy essentially is, as the immune cells attack the nerves, we lose those nerves in the brain, so the brain shrinks. So brain atrophy is a really good measure of finding out whether treatments are actually having an effect and helping to keep those nerve cells alive. So this is not yet available on the NHS, but in 2020 we're hoping to have more news as the drug company who developed it have submitted it for licensing. But I think it is worth noting that the people who were on the trial who had secondary progressive MS had been diagnosed with secondary progressive MS for less than 4 years on average. So this is a treatment that we think will be most effective for people who have recently been diagnosed with secondary progressive MS. So myelin repair is another huge area of MS research at the moment. So we know that in our brains we have stem cells which are able to naturally repair myelin. So these nerve cells are able to signal for help, and these stem cells are then able to travel to that site of damage and kind of transform into myelin-making cells. So they can attach onto the nerve and put that myelin back onto the nerve. So we know that in MS and also as we age, this natural repair system doesn't work as effectively as it should. So ongoing research is kind of trying to find out ways of kickstarting this process and reverting back to a stage in which the myelin is able to be repaired. So we want to understand a bit more about how those cells signal for help and kind of identify different targets for treatments. And exciting work at the moment in our Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair is looking at the effects of ageing on myelin repair as well, because we know that even in people without MS, that myelin repair process gets worse as we age. So one example of a trial we're currently funding is the bexarotene trial. So this is being run by researchers at the Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair, and they use tissue from the tissue bank, which Ben mentioned earlier, to identify a receptor in the brain that they think is involved in myelin repair. So excitingly, they also realised that a treatment called bexarotene, which is currently used as a cancer drug, is able to work on that receptor. So they hypothesised that if we have a receptor that's involved in myelin repair and we have a treatment that targets that receptor, is that treatment able to increase myelin repair? So as this bexarotene treatment is already used to treat cancer, we knew a lot more about the safety and the side effects of it. So this meant we were able to go straight into a phase 2 trial. So this phase 2 trial is nearing the end now, and we're expecting the results in the next few months. And they involved 50 people with relapsing MS. And they want to test the safety of the treatment and also see whether there are any changes in their MRI, see whether there is any increase in myelin repair as well. So that's some news that we're hoping to be able to share in the next few months. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, I would keep an eye on the MS Society website. I spoke briefly about the role of stem cells in myelin repair, but I just wanted to kind of highlight a little bit more about that. So in our brains, we have something called neuronal stem cells. So these are cells that are able to transform into lots of different cells in the brain. So for example, they could transform into neurons or different supporting cells. But one that we're really interested in is oligodendrocytes. So these are kind of another type of stem cell which kind of are created from these neuronal stem cells. So we know that oligodendrocytes are involved in myelin repair. So these neuronal stem cells are able to transform into something called an oligodendrocyte progenitor cell, or OPC for short, which is much easier to say. And these OPCs are able to transform into a myelin-making cell. So ongoing research at the moment is looking at the role of these OPCs and how they transform into myelin-making cells. Because as we age, these OPCs are less likely to transform into myelin-making cells, which results in kind of a reduced rate of myelin repair. So we're currently funding 16 research projects that are looking at myelin repair. Many of these are based at the Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair. So, for example, we have been able to use tissue from the tissue bank to identify different targets for treatments. So I spoke about the bexarotene trial. So we're able to discover a protein that triggers a switch that's able to kind of increase the number of myelin-making cells. Another new and exciting piece of research is the kind of effect of metformin. So researchers at the Cambridge Centre actually realised that older rats were less likely to show myelin repair than younger rats. And they hypothesised that it was something to do with the environment in the brain that stops that myelin repair from happening. So they transplanted these oligodendrocyte precursor cells, these stem cells, from the brains of old rats and put them into the brains of young rats. And they actually saw that these stem cells were able to kind of be rejuvenated and were able to repair myelin again. And kind of ongoing work has also shown that we're able to see this effect in fasting as well. So when older rats were given a diet where they ate every other day, they actually showed an increased level of myelin repair. So these OPCs were being rejuvenated because of something to do with this fasting diet. Obviously, a diet where you only eat every other day is very extreme and not something that we would advocate. But excitingly, they actually found that a drug called metformin, which is currently used to treat diabetes, was able to mimic these effects. So the rats were able to eat every single day whilst taking metformin and still showed an increase in myelin repair. So this is work that's been very recently reported, but there's some exciting plans to hopefully run a phase 2 trial of metformin in people with MS. Because as I mentioned earlier with baxaritine, because it's already used to treat cancer, we know about the side effects, so it can skip straight into a phase 2 trial. The same is true of metformin, because we know it's commonly used to treat diabetes. We know a lot about the kind of safety and the side effects and the doses that work. So we can go straight into that phase 2 trial. So this is kind of ongoing at the moment as to whether the funding will be available and kind of setting up the infrastructure. But this is hopefully another exciting trial into myelin repair. And finally, we also need to make sure that the environment in which the nerves live is as optimal as possible. So we can do this in several ways. So making sure that nerves have the energy they need to function, because nerves are really long. So getting a molecule from one end to the other requires a lot of energy. So that will help these nerves to be able to move molecules along the cell. We also need to be able to clear up the debris that is left over when myelin is damaged, because we think this also impacts the kind of function of the nerve cells. So right now we're funding around 10 neuroprotection projects, looking at understanding more about the roles of different cells in the brain, finding new treatment targets, and kind of really understanding more about how cells make their energy and how they move molecules around the brain. An example of a trial that we're currently funding into neuroprotection is the simvastatin trial. So simvastatin, again, is a drug that's used to treat another condition. So it's commonly used to treat high cholesterol. So again, we know it's safe, we know the side effects. So this went straight into a phase 2 trial. And they found that simvastatin was able to reduce brain shrinkage in people with secondary progressive MS over 2 years. So this was a really positive result, and this was called the MS STAT trial. So because this was so positive and because this treatment showed an effect, we were able to take it into a phase 3 trial. So this phase 3 trial will involve over 1,000 people with secondary progressive MS across the UK. So there are over 30 trial sites ranging from Edinburgh to London. I think there's one in Manchester as well. So we really need to be able to recruit as many people as possible, and they'll be looking at the effects of simvastatin in a larger range of people. So this trial is currently recruiting, and they're looking for people with secondary progressive MS to take part. If you are interested in registering your interest for that trial, you can visit the website here, so ms-stat2.info. So I'll just show you a short video from Professor Jeremy Chataway, who's the principal investigator of the trial, who can explain a little bit more about the trial.
I've been involved in MS for 20-25 years, but particularly recently concentrating on trials in progressive multiple sclerosis. MS STAT2, really exciting. This is a headline project, and it's what we call a phase 3 trial. So the final definitive late phase trial to tell us, yes or no, whether simvastatin slows the rate of progression in secondary progressive multiple sclerosis. It's all about seeing if the drug reduces the rate of progression. So can it slow down the change that's happening? The great thing is that we know simvastatin inside out. It's being used in millions of people around the world for heart attack and for stroke and lowering cholesterol. We regard it as a very safe drug to use. If successful, it will be a fabulous part of the treatment of progressive multiple sclerosis. About 30 sites around the UK will be looking for over 1,000 people with second progressive multiple sclerosis to enter this clinical trial. So we're really enthusiastic for people with second progressive multiple sclerosis to take part. In a way, it's the community's trial, and it's supported by people with MS who have been fundamental to the design of the trial. I have high hopes, and I really do believe that it's a drug that has a significant role in slowing progression in multiple sclerosis.
So yeah, once again, we are still recruiting people to take part in that trial, and it's a really exciting trial for us to be involved in. So do look into it if you think you'd be eligible. So I've spoken a little bit about stem cells already, but I just wanted to talk a bit more about the role of stem cells in MS. And first start off by talking really about what stem cells are. So stem cells essentially are cells within the body that are able to transform into any other cells. So this is a really kind of important thing for these cells to be able to do, and also very rare. So most cells have one function, and that's what they do. Whereas these stem cells are actually able to transform into different cells. So for example, they can either replicate themselves, they can make more stem cells, or they can change into things like blood cells, skin cells, and also neurons and cells of the brain as well. So one type of stem cell is called a hematopoietic stem cell. So these HSCs, which is much easier to say, are able to transform into all of the different cells of the blood and the immune system. So they can transform into red blood cells, they can transform into platelets, and they're also able to transform into the immune cells, so these T and B cells. So hematopoietic stem cells have been kind of implicated in MS, and there's been research into using them to treat MS. Obviously, because we know the immune cell plays a big role in MS, a cell that's able to transform into an immune cell is very interesting in this condition. So the type of treatment that's been studied with regards to these HSCs is called HSCT. So this is a transplantation therapy, and essentially what happens during HSCT is these HSCs are taken out of the body and taken away to a lab and kind of grown up and stored. At the same time, the immune system is completely wiped out using chemotherapy. So once the immune system has been completely wiped out, these HSCs are then introduced back into the body, and the rationale for that is that introducing these stem cells back into the body will enable them to transform into all of the different cells of the kind of immune system, so we can grow those immune cells again. And it's essentially kind of viewed as kickstarting the immune system again. So this has been shown to have potential benefits for people with MS, and particularly for people with highly active relapsing MS, where the immune system is still playing a large part in the condition. It has been shown to be able to slow or halt disability progression, and for some people they do go into a phase of remission where they don't experience any symptoms of their MS. I think it's really important to note here though that it does carry some very significant side effects. Because obviously if you're wiping out the whole immune system at the same time, you're very susceptible to getting any number of infections, and many of these can be fatal if your body doesn't have those immune cells to be able to fight it off. It also requires some very specialist aftercare, so it involves kind of a haematologist and a neurologist working in combination together to kind of look at the effects of this treatment. And it also does require a period of isolation where you're not able to kind of leave a very clean, safe room because of the risk of developing those infections. So research into this has been very positive so far. So a trial that reported results last year called the MISS trial actually found that it was able to stop relapses and improve levels of disability for people with relapsing MS. But they did find that it was most effective for people with highly active relapsing MS, because in MS, as MS progresses, the immune system plays less of a role, and particularly with secondary progressive MS, ceases to play a role at all. So having a treatment that targets the immune system is not likely to be effective if you're in a stage of the condition where the immune system isn't playing a role. However, what we don't know about HSCT is how it compares to current treatments, because they did compare the effects of HSCT to some of the available DMTs at the time. But since then, we've had several new highly effective treatments like ocrelizumab and alemtuzumab, which weren't tested in this trial. So what we want to know now is really whether these highly effective DMTs are better or worse than HSCT, because obviously all treatments carry side effects, but the side effects of HSCT do include death as well, and these kind of highly effective treatments do also carry some side effects, but they are less extreme than this HSCT treatment. So what we really want to know is how they compare, so we can help people to make informed decisions about their treatments. So research into that is currently still ongoing, although it is available as a third-line treatment on the NHS for people with relapsing MS who are continuing to experience relapses after trying 2 different DMTs. But it is also worth pointing out as well that the eligibility criteria for that treatment are quite strict as well. So one trial that is kind of due to start imminently is the STAR-MS trial, which, as I said, will be comparing these kind of most intensive DMTs to HSCT. So they're going to be comparing HSCT to Lemtrada and Ocrevus. So we really want to know kind of which one shows better outcomes. Another form of stem cell therapy, which is different to HSCT, is called mesenchymal stem cell therapy, or MSCT. So these mesenchymal stem cells are found in the bone marrow, and they're able to kind of make lots of different cells, including bone, fat, and cartilage. There's also some evidence that has shown that they're able to reduce inflammation and also fight off cell death. So as I mentioned earlier, cell death is kind of hugely important in MS because as MS progresses, those nerve cells do die off. So a treatment that's able to kind of fight that cell death would be incredible. So there has been research done into this mesenchymal stem cell therapy, or MSCT. And essentially it's different to HSCT because it doesn't involve that chemotherapy aspect. So the immune system remains intact. What happens is these MSCs are taken from the body and kind of grown up into large numbers in the lab and then introduced back into the body. So researchers hypothesize that they're able to then release factors which have a positive effect on kind of inflammation and also nerve cell death. So this is currently an experimental treatment and it's in phase 2 trials at the moment. We've had some initial results from these trials, but we're still awaiting kind of the main results of this trial. So this is still an experimental treatment. So as I mentioned earlier, and as Ben mentioned as well, our number one goal at the MS Society is to make sure that everyone living with MS has access to effective treatments, including treatments which are able to slow, stop, or even reverse the accumulation of disability. So this isn't something that we currently have available, but we've recently launched our Stop MS appeal, which is an appeal aiming to raise £100 million over kind of the next 5 to 10 years. So what we want to do is to be able to kind of increase our research funding and speed up the time it takes to create these effective treatments for everyone living with MS, including progressive MS. So we've been in kind of a discrete phase of the appeal for the last 5 years. So we've been reaching out to major donors and philanthropists. And we've already been able to raise £47 million towards our £100 million target. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we hope to do kind of with that increased funding. So as I mentioned, it can take around 15 years for a new treatment to be created. And obviously it's a very long process. It goes through all of these different stages. But what we want to do at the MS Society is to speed this up significantly, because we know that people with MS can't be waiting another 15 years for a new treatment. So there are several ways that we're thinking that we'll be able to speed up these clinical trials. So one example of a trial that we've already run is called the MS SMART trial. So this was the first multi-arm trial in a neurodegenerative condition. So a multi-arm trial essentially means that multiple treatments are compared to a placebo or kind of the standard treatment at one time. So rather than kind of setting up and running a single trial that tests one treatment against a placebo, we're able to test multiple treatments at once, which means that our chances of showing an effect are much greater. And also we're essentially running 3 trials in one. So this was a phase 2 trial with 3 different arms, and another way that we think we can speed up the development of treatments is to repurpose drugs. So I've mentioned quite a few times now about using treatments that are already available for other conditions, and researchers are identifying treatments that they think will be effective in MS. So this trial tested 3 different drugs and compared them to a placebo. And it was a trial that ran across the UK with many different trial sites, and over 400 people with secondary progressive MS were involved. Unfortunately, this trial found that none of these treatments were effective as treatments for secondary progressive MS. But there were some kind of positive things to take away from this trial. So setting up trials is kind of hugely difficult, and there's a lot of very difficult statistics involved, particularly when you're comparing multiple treatments to one. So one of the key takeaways from this trial was that this is something that's possible with the current research infrastructure in the UK. We also found that it was possible to deliver this at multiple sites. So these sites were capable of kind of working in collaboration with each other. And what we want to do next is to build on the work of this MS SMART trial, but also take it one step further. So our kind of ultimate goal for the next few years, and through the Stop MS appeal, is to set up and fund a clinical trials platform. So we've been working in conjunction with researchers from across the UK in an expert consortium. So these are researchers who are kind of very experienced in clinical trial design, in kind of MS research, and they've been working to select promising treatments that we could take into another clinical trial. What we want to really do is to take multiple treatments into a trial and speed up those individual trials. So I've got a diagram on the next page which should hopefully explain this a bit better. So essentially this is a multi-arm, multi-stage trial. So instead of setting up a single trial and comparing one treatment to a placebo, what we want to do is set up a trial, a phase 2 trial, and compare multiple treatments to a placebo. So obviously, like with the MS SMART trial, our chances of success from this trial are much greater than if we're just testing a single treatment. But we want to take it one step further than the MS SMART trial and actually make this a platform where treatments can go seamlessly through those trial stages. So currently, if a trial is set up and it's a phase 2 trial, it takes some time to set that up and run it, and then the trial ends and it's kind of closed down and the statistical analysis is done. But what we want to do with this trial is to be able to go from phase 2 to phase 3 much easier and retain the people who've been recruited for the phase 2 trial and just take that into the next phase. So this seems kind of very straightforward, and you're probably thinking, like, why haven't we done this before? And when I first found out about it, I was like, oh yeah, that seems so obvious. Why is that not how trials are run? Ultimately, it's very expensive to run. We need that infrastructure in research in the UK to be able to actually run this. There are so many different players involved in it, and we've been working really hard over the last few years to kind of build that collaboration and build that community of clinical trial experts, and get them on board with this idea. So yeah, we're hoping to be able to kind of formally announce this trial next year, and ultimately the goal of it is to find treatments for progressive MS specifically. So we will be recruiting people with progressive MS to be involved in this trial. So the next steps of this. So we've received an application from the researchers who want to run this trial, and they're Professor Jeremy Chataway and Professor Max Palmer, both based at UCL. And what we're doing now is kind of assessing that application for kind of scientific quality, feasibility, looking at the costs involved. So that's currently undergoing peer and lay review. We're hoping to be able to kind of approve that award and sign off that funding by the end of this year, or possibly actually the start of next year now, with the trial set to commence in early 2020 and actually start recruiting people with MS by the end of the year. So this is a piece of work that we'll be doing kind of a great deal of communications around once it's announced. So do kind of keep looking at the MS Society website for the latest news on that and how you could get involved. So there are several other ways that you can get involved in research. So obviously I've spoken a lot about different clinical trials. So one way to find out more about clinical trials that you might be able to get involved in is through the Be Part of Research website. So if you search for Be Part of Research on Google, that should take you to the website, and you can type in the condition that you're interested in getting involved in a clinical trial for, and it will be able to show you trials that are recruiting, the eligibility criteria for those trials as well. And if you kind of are already involved in a clinical trial, or that's something you're not interested in, there are other ways to get involved in our research as well. So Ben mentioned about the MS Register. So this is kind of a database where people can answer surveys about their MS. It can combine that kind of personal and kind of your own information with the clinical information that the NHS holds as well, and really see kind of where the gaps are and what we need to be focusing our research on. Another way is our research network. So this is run by my colleague Jenny, and the research network is essentially a way for people with MS to get involved directly in the research that we fund. So this kind of can take many forms. So things like assessing grant applications from researchers. You can also get involved in things like writing for our Research Matters magazine as well. Because what we really want to do, we want to make sure that all of the research that we fund is directly kind of applicable to people with MS and people with MS's lives. So the only way we can really do that is to get people with MS involved at every stage of the research process. So by reviewing those grants and kind of speaking directly to the researchers about what's important to you. And finally, I know Ben spoke about this earlier, but there is the MS Society Tissue Bank. So this is a way for you to leave your brain and spinal cord to MS research. And as you saw in the video from Professor Richard Reynolds, MS is a uniquely human condition. So although scientists have been working to develop lots of different ways of studying MS, including using cells in a dish, using animal models, using computer modelling, what we really want to know is what happens in that MS tissue. And the only way we can do that is by using kind of brain and spinal cord tissue. So obviously this is kind of a lot of information to take in one talk, and I wouldn't expect you to kind of retain everything I've spoken about today. But we do have a lot of different sources of research information as well. So we have our Research Matters magazine, which comes out 3 times a year and sits inside MS Matters. So this is kind of research updates, interviews with researchers, kind of more information about the research that we're funding as well. We also have our website, so we have news stories and blogs, but we also do update that regularly with the latest research breakthroughs as well. You can also find us on social media, so we have YouTube, Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. So we do share research information on there, as well as lots of different types of work that we do as well. So if you're interested in getting involved in our campaigns or finding out more about what the MS Society can offer you, our website and social media are a really great tool for finding that out. And of course, we also have our helpline. So this can be an email or phone service where you can talk to someone about anything related to MS. So if you want to find out about the latest research, if you want to know kind of how to support someone that you know who's living with MS, and anything else, the helpline are brilliant and will be there to help you. So just to finish, I just wanted to flag a little bit about how our research is funded, because obviously we're a charity, so we rely on donations. And actually almost 50% of our research is funded by legacies, so people who leave a gift in their will. And you'll be able to see that this is our income for 2018, and legacies made up a huge proportion of that. And this funding really is vital for us to be able to continue doing the research that we do and continue to find out more about treatments, causes, and how to stop MS. So thank you very much for listening. I'm sure there'll probably be quite a lot of questions, so Adam will be going around with the microphone again. So I'm looking forward to answering any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Right. Is this thing on? Oh, no, it's not on. No, I turn it back off. There we go. Who wants to ask the first question? Right, I'll go over here first, and then I'll come back down this side. I'm getting some good exercise today, that's for sure.
Can you say something about how people are selected to take part in trials and what the eligibility criteria are, please?
Yeah, of course. So the eligibility criteria really does depend trial to trial, because each trial will be testing different treatments, and each treatment will be kind of more effective for certain people. So I can't answer kind of specifics about kind of trials that people can take part in, but this eligibility criteria, this eligibility criteria will be available when you're kind of registering your interest in the trial, and also speak to your neurologist as well. So they should be aware of trials that you would be eligible to take part in as well.
Cool, there's a question over here.
If it's a uniquely human disease, what is the purpose of animal studies? Is it just to find out if it doesn't kill them all?
So animal studies, yeah. So MS is a kind of uniquely human condition in which, I mean that animals in the wild wouldn't develop MS. But animal research does kind of form a really important part of that research process in kind of several different ways. So for MS specifically, you are able to kind of induce an MS-like condition into animal models. So this means we can then test those treatments and see if they're effective at treating that kind of MS-like condition. And also, as you mentioned, safety of treatments and toxicity is something that we really do need to use animals to find out more about, because it would be hugely, hugely unethical to test a treatment that's never been tested before in humans. If we don't know the side effects, we don't know whether it's safe. So side effects is kind of a big part of it as well. I think it is also really important to note that animal research is not something that we kind of fund lightly. It's, in an ideal world, there would be no animal research. And there is a lot of kind of work looking into alternative ways of studying MS as well. So when researchers submit their grant applications to us, they do have to show us where they've tried to reduce and kind of limit the number of animal experiments that they do. So we don't take that lightly, but in kind of the current state of research, it is hugely important for helping us to find out more about MS.
Another question. I'll move there and then there.
I'm just wondering why you use people without the disease in your tests.
So in those phase 1 trials, really what we want to know isn't whether the treatment is effective. We want to understand more about the side effects and kind of whether people find it a tolerable treatment to take. So I think the justification for doing that in people without MS is that if we do it in healthy people, we know that any side effects that are associated with that treatment are due to the treatment and not possibly a side effect of the MS as well, if that makes sense.
Question from here.
For the treatments that are currently in the phase 2 and phase 3 trials that you said on there,
yeah,
are any of those advancements on current treatments or just add-ons to existing treatments that are available currently?
So, yeah, there's a lot of research kind of going into how we improve treatments as well. So not just finding completely new targets, but looking at the existing treatments that we have and finding out how we can reduce the side effects and make them more effective. So some of those treatments will be kind of building on knowledge that we've already kind of used to develop treatments and ultimately leading to a more refined treatment, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And of course, there will be treatments that do target kind of completely different mechanisms, so will be completely different to any other treatments available. But it is a mix of different ones, yeah.
Any more questions? There's a question here, yep.
It's not really a question, it's just a light-hearted comment. What on earth are all these gobbledygook words? We don't understand them, we can't even say them. You couldn't even say it.
No, I can't say a lot of them. It's, yeah, I definitely appreciate that. And unfortunately, researchers will name drugs based on kind of the way that they act. And a lot of the time, these aren't names that would make sense to anyone else unless they've got a scientific background. I think, unfortunately, that's just kind of how research works. And once treatments kind of go through that licensing phase, they will often be given a kind of name that's used to market them as well. So, for example, ocrelizumab would be the kind of name of the drug from a scientific point of view, whereas Ocrevus is what it's kind of marketed under because it's kind of a bit easier to say, a bit easier to remember. But no, I agree, it doesn't really make very much sense from an outside perspective and can make it very hard to kind of understand more about where the research is at and what's going on and kind of what treatments are out there. Yeah.
Oops, that might just be one of my favourite ever questions at one of these events, by the way. Just going to go to the back here.
For the statin trial, does it have to be simvastatin or can it be any statin?
So the STAT2 trial is specifically looking at simvastatin. I think some research has shown that that's the most effective one, or looks to be the most effective one for MS. But I think the only research currently is into that simvastatin drug, yeah.
Any more questions? Yep, there's one here.
My wife has been to see the MS nurse and put herself down for any clinical trials which might be available, really, for a condition.
Yeah.
And this one, with the statins, obviously, I mean, is that through you or through the MS nurse or what? Because, you know, she hasn't been called up for any trials at all.
No.
Or does she not meet the criteria?
No, that's frustrating, and I think kind of unfortunately a lot of the time it can depend on how informed those MS nurses are about all of the different trials. So I'd say if you're interested in finding out more about whether you're eligible for that trial, I can give you the website that should give you more information, and you can register your interest via that. And also I would say just to kind of be aware of that Be Part of Research website, and just check up on that occasionally to see whether there are clinical trials that you'd be eligible to take part in.
Yeah, but they keep asking, each time we go, they ask us and we say, yeah, we'll take the trials, but
Yeah.
you think, well, why are they asking us when they don't kind of follow it up?
Yeah, no, I can imagine that's really frustrating. I don't know kind of the answer to how to solve that, to be honest, apart from, yeah.
I mean, we sit in
Yeah.
a room for like half an hour filling a load of work, paperwork up, and then nothing follows after.
Yeah.
Do you want
No,
to add
that's
to that?
frustrating. Yeah, of course.
So the data bank that I mentioned before, the MS Register, quite a lot of the trials recruit through that, especially some of the bigger ones. So if you haven't registered already, it could be one of the ways where you could hear about the trials directly. Another thing, like Caitlin mentioned, is just check the MS.2 website, which should have the criteria online to see whether you'll be eligible. I'm sure if you asked your MS nurse and came with that criteria, they'll be able to go through it with you.
Well, I think we've got time for two more questions. Let's get another couple in. One question out. Yep, one more at the back.
I have been to MS Live several times. When is it going to be on again? Will it be the next year? MS Live.
MS Live, yeah. I think actually, unfortunately, the decision has been made not to run MS Live kind of as one large event anymore. I think what we're aiming to do is to try and make it a little bit more accessible to people who might not be able to travel to kind of this one event in London. So our events team are looking at the option of having kind of smaller, more regional events in place of that large kind of MS Live event. But I would also say that if you kind of are interested in finding out about all of the different events that we've got on, they should be on our website.
And our final question will come from this lady.
I just want to ask you about beta interferon. My son injects himself every few days with it, and I just wondered, it was mentioned as being not as, it was mentioned as not being as effective as some of the other things, and I just wonder what's happening with it. Is it still used very widely where it is effective?
Yeah, so beta interferons are still very widely used and very widely prescribed, and for some people they will find that they're really effective at managing their MS. So kind of how those treatments are prescribed is currently they'll go through kind of different tiers of treatments. So if you're prescribed beta interferons and it seems to be effective for you, you won't then move on to a more aggressive treatment because there's probably not that much point. Whereas some people do find that beta interferons don't work very effectively for them, so they'd then be eligible to kind of move on to a more aggressive treatment.
Okay, well, I think that lunch is being brought out now, and this is drawing things to a close. So, can just like to say a big thank you again to Caitlin and Ben for two really superb talks today. So, please give them another round of applause. Thank you. So just a few things before we wrap up. Just like to remind you about parking. If you've driven here today, please visit the Manchester Central reception desk just through the foyer there to get your parking validated again. Just say you attended the MS Society event, and they will do that for you for free. Second thing is an apology that at all of these events we give you a goodie bag at the end, which contains more information about MS research, has a few things like this jazzy pin badge here, and also contains more information about what Caitlin was talking about with regards to legacy giving as well. But unfortunately, the bags haven't arrived, so we can blame Parcel Force for that. I'm very, very sorry, but we know who all of you are who've attended today, so what we'll do is we'll send them to you in the post after, so you will receive those, but I'm just very sorry we're not able to send them to you today. No, you are very welcome, very, very sorry about that. And finally, the final thing, lunch is being prepared, it's ready now at the back of the venue, so please do enjoy that. If you're someone who's got dietary requirements and you are unable to see your specific dietary needs catered for, please just come and speak to me during lunch and we'll sort that out. Apart from that, it just leaves me to say thank you very much for everyone coming today. We really, really appreciate you all coming out, and we're just incredibly grateful to see so many of you here today. So enjoy the rest of your day and the weekend. Thank you very much.